Welcome back for part 2 of the Regional Food Conference. We had a great discussion last night. We've had a night's sleep in between, but we didn't finish until about 8:30 yesterday evening. So thank you to those of you who've come back again this morning, and welcome to those who are just joining the conversation for the first time. For the Region is an alliance of organisations and businesses and communities across the 4 counties of South West Wales, which is Neath, Talbot, Swansea, Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire. And we convene these discussions on an annual basis and try and keep the conversation going regionally about the food system. And our goal is to bring people together to share updates on all the exciting and ambitious projects that are underway across South West Wales, to connect with like-minded people and projects, break down some of those silos, but also to come together with a shared sense of purpose and a shared set of values and co-create a shared vision of what we want for the future of our food system. And I don't need to tell you, but there are lots of challenges and problems that we need to address across the food system. Some of those are areas that we perhaps can have some agency, particularly when we work collaboratively or when we work locally. And others, as we explored yesterday, are big global structures that can be demoralizing to think about. So we talked yesterday about the nature of global capitalism and the food system that's so international that makes cheap imported produce easily accessible, and good, healthy, locally grown produce unaffordable and difficult to access. So big structures like that challenge us all. And how do we keep going? How do we keep hopeful? How do we keep active in this space against all odds, trying to build resilience and amplify the mission to strengthen our local food economy across the region? Yesterday, we focused a lot on why people do or don't choose local produce when they're doing their food shopping, and how we can start to reach out to more people. We acknowledge the fact that when we come together in a meeting like this, we are a bubble. We're a bubble of passion. We are probably quite like-minded in what we want to see and what we hope for and our areas of work. But how do we reach out to a wider number of people across the population and put local, sustainably produced food higher on everybody's agenda? And what can we do ourselves in communities, in organisations, and what policy changes are needed? You know, where does this become a challenge for Welsh Government? What do we want local authorities to do? Oh, there we go, there's Tom from Kaitan. I'll just mute you there, Tom. You're probably out on the land as you speak, but welcome to the meeting. Yeah, so there are lots of different parts of the system that have agency over different things, and it's all up for discussion. But these meetings are an opportunity for us to reaffirm our shared commitment to transforming the regional food system and to identify those areas of potential collaboration and initiatives that we can take forward. But we leave these meetings feeling uplifted and feeling that there is loads of positive stuff going on. Obviously, we want it to happen at greater scale than it currently is. I think we all share that ambition, but it's really great to hear from people across the food system about the kinds of projects that are happening. And we can learn from each other, we can share what works, stand by each other in the difficult times, and see how we can better support local food producers, smaller farmers and growers, farmers across our region who are having a really difficult time, as are many businesses, hospitality and food businesses, experiencing huge difficulties. And these are not easily surmountable problems, but hopefully meetings like this bring us all together and emerge a shared sense of possibility and progress towards the future that we want for our regional food system. Today's conversation, we're going to be talking about land, which emerged last year as a key barrier to more community food growing, more new farmers entering the sector. And it would be great to share some examples of groups and organisations across the region who are taking a proactive approach to securing land for food growing, and what are some of the challenges around that, and what should we be fighting for, what should we be asking for from local authorities and from government. And then we'll be talking about the connection between local food and the hospitality and tourism sector. So how can we strengthen the food identity of our region and make sure that when people are visiting, whether we're eating out in cafes and restaurants across the region or visitors coming as part of the visitor economy, what food story are we telling to ourselves and to people who are coming into Southwest Wales, and how can we amplify and improve the accessibility and availability of fantastic local produce. So those are our themes, really: land and hospitality and tourism. So we'll get into some discussion about that. I'd like to say thank you to BIC Innovation and NutriWales for sponsoring this event, to put a little bit of resource and time for us to run and host this meeting, and also to our partners, NRW, Group Resilience in Pembrokeshire, who are incredibly active and supportive in this space as well, and Swansea Environmental Forum, who we partner with regularly to bring you these co-creative conversations that hopefully are a way to connect up what's happening and reaffirm our commitment to making progress. And out of these meetings come a huge number of actions, ideas, and potential areas of work. And our role really is to kind of capture everything that's said and pull that together into actionable reports, and to make sure those reports are seen and digested by people with influence and agency in this space. So that includes larger businesses across the region, larger organisations, the local authorities, and of course Welsh Government. So we're capturing everything you say, and my colleague Evie is writing notes throughout the meeting, but please do, as I say, share links in the chat, and all of that will feed in to our reporting. So thank you again for being here. We're going to start by a few moments of quiet reflection, and I'd like you to think about what you would love to see. So think for yourself and try and write down perhaps 3 points. If we're successful in making a difference and strengthening Southwest Wales's regional food economy, what does that look like? So I'm going to slow down my talking and enable you guys to just reflect for a moment for yourselves about what you would love to see. What does that look like? You know, if we come back together in, let's say, 5 years' time, and we've put into action some of the things that you really feel are important, what does that look like? And then together, as we have this conversation, we can start to describe that ideal future, which is part of kind of connecting around that shared sense of vision, which I think empowers all of us then to go out and make that happen in our daily lives and in our work. But what would you love to see? What does that ideal future look like if we're successful in making a difference to the regional food system? What does that look like in 5 years' time? Take a few moments to write perhaps 3 bullet points for yourself about what you would love to see. Okay, we've got a broad diversity of people from different parts of the food system, from activists and campaigners and local organisers to businesses and larger organisations. So there should be a range of perspectives and hopefully lots of overlap and some fresh perspectives as well. So I'm going to invite you to jump into a small group conversation and have 10 minutes in a breakout room just to share what you've written down. So the reason you've written it down is just gather your thoughts, but within your small groups, make sure everyone has the opportunity to share the 3 things they've written down, and then come back into the room ready to talk about where you shared the same vision and anything that stood out for you in that conversation. So what does success look like? If we're successful in this work, what does that look like in 5 years' time? What would you love to see? I'm going to open the breakout rooms and I'll bring you back in about 10 minutes' time. If you need any tech support, just let me in. So I hope you had a nice conversation in your breakout rooms about what the goal is. What does it look like if we're successful in making a difference in this work? What are we working towards? What would you love to see? So start putting your hands up, because I'd love to hear from anyone that's willing to share their own vision or anything that was that stood out for you in your conversations, and what the ideal future looks like to you. Julie, lovely. How would you like to start us off?
Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all again. I'm afraid I can't share my screen because if I do, then I actually lose my connection. But I was fascinated by the dialogue last night, and obviously again this morning, albeit with different participants. One of the things that we discussed in the breakout room 9, which I was just lucky to be in, was how we actually approach the challenges and being a little bit more creative about how we approach the challenges. In the very successful recent completed project, Field to Forks, Gower Field to Forks, we approached it quite differently in establishing the market first for the produce, and in doing that we released a lot of the burden on local growers to actually run the risk themselves, because when we actually are producing food, we have to remember that it's the suppliers and growers who face the challenge and the risks, because obviously not all their produce can be purchased. If they can't sell, if their produce can't be used, then obviously it's a very heavy burden on them. Whereas in Field to Forks, we actually established the market first, and we said we need X amount of produce. We want that to be grown locally. Having the backing of the local authority in that was hugely significant, and working very closely with a food processor and producing company, Castell Howell. So we were able to take that burden from the growers, which I think was one of the key elements of success that we haven't actually discussed yet, because they were actually guaranteed that if they provided the resources that we would put them to good use. So I think sometimes you have to, turn the prospect on its head, perhaps, and rather than say, oh, this can't be done because of market forces, global markets or supermarket ideology, then we need to really approach it creatively and say, look, what can we do? Where are the sticking points and how do we overcome them?
Yeah, great message to kick off today's meeting. Thank you for that, Julie. And it really came through in yesterday's discussion and in lots of conversations with farmers and growers that they need some certainty about who will buy their produce. So the earlier we can start talking and lining up those buyer relationships. Yeah, a creative approach. Thanks, Julie. Great. Val, what would you love to see?
Lots more fully grassroots initiatives. They call it do-it-yourself politics or mutual aid. So rather than feeling that the economy is against us or we haven't got support of our elected representatives, there's so much that we can do just by coming together with our neighbours. So just starting to do that. Maybe somebody that wants to kick it off in their street, just going door to door, knocking the doors and just see who's up for stuff, and then sort of in a few years' time, hopefully that's a lot of streets all connected together across Swansea, and working groups that can help push things along, and just doing the things that we need to do. And then if we need the council on board to help with funding or whatever, then we go to the council with a very thought out plan of what we need and how many people are involved in this and wanting it. And so we're in a much stronger negotiating position then. So yeah, bring the community back, that's what I say.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. What a great vision. And yes, I think that's how we can empower ourselves, isn't it? What can we just get started with now and get on with in our local areas? And of course, where we live is where we do still have some agency and opportunity. So yeah, more of that, more grassroots initiatives. Thank you, Val. Rachel, what would you love to see?
Great. Thank you. I'll slow my hand first. In Group 11, we had 2 local authorities and Christine from Food Bank, so a slightly different perspective. We were looking at, which was really, really important, Christine mentioned about having just enough food to be physically and mentally healthy. So it isn't just about having the food to make you healthy from a nutritional perspective, but also not to have the financial worry and the stress of not having enough food to eat. So I think that was a really important point. We also thought in 3 years, 5 years time, we'd really like to see more independent butchers, bakers, etc. on the high street. And we'd like to see much less packaging and more sustainable products to buy. And we also feel looking at supply chains as well, making sure pricing structures are correct and that we are getting value for money. And also, again, from a local authority perspective, making sure that supply chain is safe. So, and providing support to small producers to make sure that things are not just fresh, but also safe, in terms of allergies, in terms of disease, etc. Because, it's difficult for small companies to have the resource to do perhaps the paperwork, etc., sitting behind these products. So maybe more support and easier routes with environmental health or whatever to support smaller businesses to ensure that they've got safe and fresh products to sell.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Great thoughts there. And I wonder if those barriers around health and safety and certification of produce are a real issue for small producers, that, as you say, local authorities and others can offer more support. And yeah, we all love that vision, don't we, of smaller local businesses. So really worth thinking about how we can collaborate to provide the support that's needed for smaller businesses to start up. And really useful reflection on the importance of food for our physical but also our mental health, and having enough food for our well-being. Yeah, thank you for that. Julia, I'd love to hear from you. What would you love to see?
Sorry, have I been typing away without being muted there?
That's okay. No, that's fine. Hi.
One of the things that was a theme in our group, we were group 4, was I'm thinking about education and an awareness of food and nature as a basic part of the curriculum. Thinking about how understanding more about mycelium and how the links to soil biome and gut biome, part of a basic understanding that we all hold that will inform our food choices. And I was also sharing about the Harmony project in Ceredigion, working with the County Council to introduce the principles of harmony and understanding of nature into primary schools across the county, which involves then the schools having their own gardens for producing food and linking with local farmers and food producers as part of the curriculum. Really exciting project.
Yeah, great to hear about the Harmony project and initiatives across the region that are seeking to better connect kids and young people with the food that they eat and where it comes from. That's a really important part of our shared vision, I think. How do we better collaborate with schools and the education system to join the dots for young people and getting more food onto the public plate. But yeah, growing our understanding and our values around food and how it affects the wider living planet. Thank you, Julia. Anyone want to speak up from a group that we haven't heard from? I'd love to see any more waving hands. Who would like to talk about their vision? Louisa. Oh, are you able to unmute there? Is Louisa there from Paverland? Thought I saw you waving.
Sorry, yeah, unmuted. Morning. Yeah, I jotted down 3 things. I'd love to see more farmers selling direct at the farm gate across the local area, more younger people finding their future career in farming, and growing local food to become economically viable for local people.
Yeah, great. Well, strong points there. And we've talked a lot, haven't we, about the real difficulties for small farmers in making ends meet. And how can we encourage more young people into farming when it's such a challenging and difficult space to make a living? But yes, thank you for sharing those points. Guy, what would you love to see?
Thank you. Yeah, I would certainly endorse what Louisa just said. In my group, I was making the point that perhaps my situation is a bit particular, but I live in a national park, the Pembrokeshire Park, which has ultimate control over planning permission and which is almost totally unaccountable. It's not an elected body. Another large institution which is also unaccountable and has large control over land is the Church of Wales, which owns a lot of property around here. And to some extent, to a lesser extent, I'd say the National Trust. And if you want a vision of young people embracing farming and getting into farming around here, it's almost impossible because there's nowhere to live. Why is there nowhere to live? Because, for example, the national park is concreting over farmland for housing developments, but the housing developments contain very little social housing. It's outrageous what's happening around St. David's. So, yes, we all want to expand local economies, local agriculture, local producers, but very difficult to do that when there's nowhere for people to live or very few places for people to live. And when we don't have control over our own destinies. So one of the things I would love to see in 5 years' time is a sort of dismantling of these structures with no accountability and much more public participation in our own destinies. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic, Guy. I think, you know, really looking at how decisions are made and more participation in that democratic process is going to be a key driver for bringing about the changes that we would love to see. And that issue of housing, affordable housing in rural areas across our region. Thank you for raising that. It's a really important issue. Helen from NRW, what would you love to see?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Dawn. In the group that I was part of, then we covered lots of ground actually, from you know, wanting to see a growth of food companies in Wales and getting more Welsh products on the shelves in shops, supermarkets, menus, and that we need to sort of innovate in that sector. And face the challenges that we're already facing now and that will intensify in future around sort of energy efficiency and climate. So how do we adapt to our changing climate with hotter, drier summers or periods of hotter and dry summers, and then obviously, you know, lashings of rain and that kind of thing. So how do we adapt to that on the land? One of the things that I would love to see, which is echoing what Louise has just said, is young people on the land, so young growers out there. You know, I'd love to have the to pass by fields in rural Wales and just see a vibrant scene really of, you know, workers on the land, things being done differently, and alongside that having thriving wildlife. Another thing is fair pay for growers as well, that came through quite strongly. Again, links to seasonality and climate, and as well as that, ensuring that what we grow is nutrient dense, and the links to health as well. And also ensuring that we fulfill our responsibility to the Wellbeing Future Generations Act through any changes that we make through food.
Yes, good list there. Sounds like you had a great conversation in that room and covered a lot of ground. Thank you, Helen, for sharing. Mary, what would you love to see?
Well, actually, in our group, Titan were in our group. I don't know if they're still connected, but I was very impressed with what they said about having training and financial support for training young people and funding for enterprises. So I was very impressed with those ideas they had.
Yeah, Kaitan, as colleagues will know, is a community supported agriculture here on Gower, and really a shining example. But yes, training and investment in skills, key.
And particularly young people, because they're the ones, you know, they're the next generation coming through, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. So important. All right, thank you, Mary. We've got Lucy from Social Farms and Gardens. Lucy, what would you love to see?
Yes, in my group, I declared a bit of an interest. I managed the Community Land Advisory Service for Social Farms and Gardens, and in November I delivered a speech to the Welsh Food Farming Conference on a vision for an ideal local authority area, and I recorded a PowerPoint presentation after its popularity. So I've provided a link to it on our YouTube Social Farms and Gardens site. But just a few things that I mentioned, things like county farms being released with local food enterprises, decisions being made collectively and things being much more joined up at a local authority level, clear environmental growth models, gateway programs for new entrants, local authorities having food growing strategies, identify suitable for food growing areas, and working with communities to identify potential new spaces on publicly available maps, clear and proportionate estates department process that takes around 2 months, funding and rental incentives for people to bring back underused allotment plots, farming and gaining financial incentives, farmers gaining financial incentives to rent land, a diverse mix of green spaces with wildflowers and community gardens and allotments on the doorstep of populated areas, high grade agricultural land, reserved for food growing, no ifs or buts, easier to gain planning permission. I'm just going through a few things quickly.
Right, well, we'll come back to some of these. I think you know, let's pick up some more of these as we get into that discussion about what needs to happen around access to land. And yes, a shout out to Lucy's presentation about what an ideal local authority would be doing. It's really useful. It's a really useful list of aspirations and advice from your expert perspective. Thank you, Lucy. There's a mention in the chat from Dawn. I'd love for you to speak up, Dawn, if you want to, but I'll share what you've written. You've said that you think maybe you're coming from a whole different direction as a registered charity and run an emergency food bank. 3 ideals would be no need for food banks. And this model needs improving, and the pantry is expanding into a larger building, repurposing of food, connecting suppliers, farmers and allotments with community pantries, and eradicate food going to landfill. So what are we doing with leftover food, and are we making sure it's getting where it really needs to go? So thank you for putting that in the chat, Dawn, and hopefully you'll speak up as well during the meeting. David, what would you like to share? What would you love to see?
Oh, well, strangely enough, I was in the group with Dawn, and that was I was going to say there were various perspectives, and I found that particular, sort of consumer perspective, but really engaging. But there were also producers and third sector, so we had a whole variety of perspectives. And one of the things that we all sort of recognise, I think, is the sort of the impending climate catastrophe. And it was the Met Office this week that sort of did something to our perspective, I think, when it said that there's a 50-50 chance that we'll actually hit 1.5 degrees centigrade in 2024 because of El Nino event and so on and so forth. And sort of that kind of focuses the mind somewhat. And it's brought me strangely to a much more abstract sort of thought about what we might do within a 5-year horizon, because we'd all agree that we need a greater resilience in the local supply chain, and already we've heard this morning lots of suggestions about how that might be achieved. But we also need to see emergency powers from all levels of government. If this is an emergency, I know the feel of this emergency is different because it's incremental, but that doesn't absolve government from responsibilities to bring forward, deploy strategies that actually help us to achieve these objectives. And one of the things that they cannot do, of course, is, sort of introduce sensible carbon taxing for, imported foods and what have you. But the most important of all things must be, sort of mobilized communities. Without mobilizing our communities, none of this is going to happen. There's so much inertia in the system. Guy was going through that yesterday, very forcefully. I think it's without that real turn to the communities, we are screwed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Some really important messages coming through, and there's such a sense of frustration around the actions that we want those with the power to take, and that they're not taking at the pace that's needed. But I'm really glad you brought it back to the importance of mobilising communities, because that's perhaps something we can all do where we live, and there's an urgent need for that kind of action to happen. And if the powers that be aren't acting quickly enough, what can we do collaboratively to try and prepare for the times ahead, and perhaps try and mitigate some of the worst impacts of the climate emergency. And it will be interesting to be back here in 5 years' time and see how much has changed, and whether this climate emergency feels a lot more real and a lot more urgent to more people. So these are fast-moving times, as you say. While sometimes we feel like we're dealing with a huge and insurmountable problem that we can't get the message across to enough people about the importance of all of this, maybe the climate will do that for us, and times will change rapidly over the next few years. Dawn, great to have you with us. What would you like to say? Oh, I can't hear you, although you have unmuted. Sorry, Dawn, I don't know if it's a problem with your microphone. That might be... No, we're not hearing you, unfortunately. It might be fixed by going out and coming back in again. I'm really sorry, but your microphone doesn't seem to be working.
Mike would like to come in, Dawn. He can't put his hand up.
Lovely. Mike, yes, what would you love to see?
Hi.
Hi.
What would I love to see? I don't know about a wish list really, but I think we're obviously at a cusp of change, And I think it's like a number of people have said, it's not so much about how we fix or improve on a system that's in place. I think it comes down to how, as individuals, we all make better and new informed choices to collectively change the way things are done. You know, the reason for the position we're in now is pretty much, you know, we are part and parcel of the reason that we've got to this stage where supermarkets govern the way that we buy and interact with food, because we've all bought into the convenience of supermarkets. We like things cheap and we like to be able to get them easily. And as someone pointed out earlier, you know, if you're paying for organic, locally produced food, then the price increases. Just local butter at the local Spar, if it's Welsh made, is £1 more expensive than if you're buying from, you know, from other sources. So we're paying more for local produce, even in the supermarkets, than we are for mass-produced products. Wales is exporting, I think the stats are 80% of the food that we grow. You know, there's an underlier sort of immediately. It's kind of the food that we are growing, we're exporting. You know, and the food that we're eating, we're importing, even though we're surrounded by farmland. So there's this whole system that we've all kind of bought into and are really part and parcel of. And I guess if that's going to change, it has to change from a new perspective and a point of education where people start to feel like actually embracing in food growing and food production at a local level and everything that goes with that is something that they care about. If people don't care about it, then they're not prepared to invest in it. So where does that change? I don't know. You know, early, I'd say, you know, at a school level, you know, from day one, bringing children up to start realizing that their future relies on really important things like local, nutritious, you know, food that's grown and is able to support an economy that can support them longer term. How and where that starts, I don't know. It starts with all of us, I guess, the people who are passionate about it. But how that grows and becomes a momentum that changes the general viewpoint of eating and buying food, well, that remains to be seen. I think it needs a big shift in consciousness for us to change the system we've got at the moment, because it's cheap and it's convenient. And as human beings, we like cheap and we like convenience. So, you know, it's a big task, but I think it starts early and it starts with education first.
Yeah, great. Thank you for explaining all that so powerfully, Mike. And I think I'm reading a book called Active Hope, and Joanna Macy talks about something that she's termed the Great Turning. And I'm finding that a helpful perspective to think that we've got this broken system, perhaps a collapsing system, and these enormous problems, the scale of the kind of those problems that feel insurmountable. How do you remain hopeful in the face of all of that, and how do you remain active? And this idea of the great turning is those of us who are building the alternative, we're building the new, what is emerging, what is being born through us, and are we being that change in our local places? But yeah, hard to keep going in the face of the scale of the problems and the entrenched power structures that we've mentioned already. But great to hear some hopeful optimism around the power of community mobilization and how we can inspire a new generation to think differently about their food and not give up in the face of the challenges that are undeniable in the scale of those. So land, let's talk about access to land. I'm sure there are people in the room who could do a better job than me of speaking about the barriers and obstacles. So we'll just spend 5 minutes listening to anyone that wants to lay out the problem for us with regards to land. It's been referenced already, but if you'd like to share a perspective on the struggle to find land, the challenge around making that land available, why is it not already happening? Why are we seeing swathes of land sold off for tree planting? What's happening to the land that farmers are selling off as they retire? Is it all turning into housing developments? And we've talked about the lack of affordable housing. But if you've got some thoughts to share around the obstacles relating to land. To set a bit of context on all of this, now is an opportunity to speak up. I know, Vicky, you're working to secure land around towns, so it's like a clear challenge around growing land in more urban areas. Looking for hands up who would like to come in and talk about the challenges relating to land. Augusta, thank you. What would you like to say?
Hi, bore da pawb. Not in a professional capacity, but in a personal capacity, we are currently looking for approximately 12 acres of land to start a food growing enterprise on. Just in the course of my lifetime in West Wales, seeing the farms consolidating into much larger holdings, due to the forces and factors that mean, you know, you have to scale up to be able to survive economically, means that parcels such as 12 acres or less come up very, very infrequently. And if they do, the price is hiked massively for equestrian interests or likewise. So it's very, very difficult to find land in the part of Wales where we want to stay that we call home. So that's what we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Augusta. Thanks for sharing. Tom from Kaitan, what would you like to say about land? Are you able to unmute yourself, Tom? Often when Tom joins these meetings, he's actually out.
Sorry, I am. Yeah, no, I am actually. I was trying to get my gloves off and get the mud off so I could switch on mute. Yeah, so yeah, no, it was really good. We had a good discussion here. Sorry, I didn't come back in because I actually didn't want to take my gloves off again. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the discussion. It's really good to hear that there's so much positive thought and so many people thinking and sort of looking down these avenues. As far as land access, I know for me and my family, we had sort of like a long process of over about 20 years really trying to look for land to set up for growing, and it was always that conundrum of either you invest in a property or you invest in land, or you go down the route of one planet development and you take the risk of basically trying to build a home on land. But it does seem like it's a real uphill struggle for anyone, you know, particularly young people, anyone who hasn't got any capital behind them, you know, to try and start a business and try and buy land, try and create a home. It's almost impossible, I'd say. There are, on the positive side, you know, there are opportunities out there. Like eventually we set up in Ilston with the support of a landowner who was really keen on our ideas. And then since that, we've had the Ecological Land Co-op who have come along and bought 18 acres in London, which we're leasing 5 acres from. And then, you know, there's another couple of small enterprises leasing from them as well. So there are positive stories and there are ways forward. But I think we just need to keep pushing every avenue for any landowner to sort of increase the possibility of access. Yeah, particularly for young people being able to work on the land and also find an affordable place to live on or nearby their land. So yeah, that's me, I think. Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Tom, for taking your gloves off and joining the discussion. And great to hear that perspective. A 20-year journey to secure land, and then friendly relationships with landowners seem to be a key success factor for new growers. Yeah, great to hear from you. Sally, what would you like to say about land?
Hi, yes. Yeah, we've fairly recently set up a co-housing project in just south of Cardigan, and we're on a 95-acre farm. And what we're hoping to offer is both affordable housing options for young people and also an opportunity for some of those young people who are going to be living here to work on the land that we've got, but opening out the land to the community. And it's quite difficult to know, you know, which way to go really, and what support is available and how best to go forward. So I was hoping that you know, I might be able to get some ideas coming today to find out more about the support available to people like us who are hoping to open up the land to more people.
Great to have you with us and to hear your perspective, Sally. And co-housing seems to me a really interesting topic for further exploration about how co-housing can potentially make affordable housing available for more people. So yeah, I know there are others in the room equally passionate about co-housing. So thank you for being here and joining the discussion. Really interesting discussion to have there. Val, what would you like to say?
Basically, we need a change in the planning laws to allow people to live on the land. We're in a climate emergency. The council in Swansea's declared a climate emergency, but we've got a very viable food project happening in Merton with the agreement of the landowner to use the land for a no dig project with copsing trees, fruit trees, etc. by a group of like a charity called Climate and Community, lots and lots of experience. They were very, very clear with the landowner, loads of discussions, and they've got a lease agreement which completely is detailed of what they plan to do, and they followed that to the letter. And that involved bringing a yurt, which the charity built themselves, beautiful structure, and various army tents. Their idea is very, very thought out, and it's based on what happened in America. I'm no expert, but it happened in America. I think they were climate resilience camps or conservation camps where they had loads and loads of, like, I think there was a lot of young people that came to the land, and there was a camp provided so that they could live on the land, and it gave people a chance to experience rural living away from the town, but also to do very, very meaningful work that was required at that time to help the economy. I think after the war, I'm not an expert, hoping that somebody from Climate Community can attend the meeting later today. But what's happened,
because I'm on a...
Pardon? Oh, you're here, Jules. So yeah, so Jules, do you want to take over from me now?
Yes, Jules.
Hello. Yeah, the project is based around sort of, yeah, practical action on climate change on a sort of strategic level, because we are facing from sort of 2050 onwards, our own government science says basically food insecurity leading to famine because of losing half to 3/4 of our best arable land on the east side due to increasing aridity and low rainfall, especially in the growing season. And that's our own science. And so if we take that seriously, we should be acting and doing as much as we can to increase local food growing, especially around the cities, because that's where the population is. And we're not doing that. And we are heading towards large numbers of people in cities falling out with each other because they don't have enough food to eat. So that's the great concern. So going back to things that worked in the past, what worked in the past was a thing called Civilian Conservation Corps, which was set up as part of the New Deal in 1930s America in response to the environmental degradation that was going on. But it was a great, it took millions of young people out into the rural areas in camps and retrained them to do, and they did emergency conservation work, land-based work. And so it was an incredible a sort of like an emergence of a sort of new environmentalism in America at the time, and it had a massive effect. And we believe that that is what is needed now in regards to the climate emergency. And food growing has got to be the focus, because yes, we do have to have all sorts of adaptations, but basically every day we need to eat. And people need to be in the rural areas to grow the land. At the moment, we've shoved everybody into the cities, and the planning is a nightmare for being out in the rural areas where the majority of the food is grown, especially the peri-urban areas, because they've become very desirable for house building and lifestyle choice. You know, especially the beaches and the lovely areas, and you know, so the house price has gone up. So this is a massive barrier. We're in a field, we lease it, there's 6 acres, and we've had sort of, we're a charity. There's not that many of us, but we've been trying to set up a project that demonstrates not only no dig growing, which is a no-brainer with regards to carbon sequestration and efficient use of water, but also to demonstrate the connection of managing coppice woodlands and using the coppice tailings to wood chip them to feed that in as a growing substrate. And this model can be expanded and can produce a lot of very good quality food. And but it's really difficult. It's really difficult. And at the moment we're facing a planning pressure with the council, and they're making our lives incredibly hard, and they may well stop the project in the process of making it very, very hard. And it's balmy, because you need people like us, and we might be a very small number of people now, but it's something that can be expanded. And if we don't take it seriously, then we're heading for some kind of violent revolution. Yeah, so yeah, a portable skills school in the field that trains people up and gets people back on the land and getting engaged with sort of nature. And also we've got to take seriously that when we go back to the land, we have got to look at low or no fossil fuel methods. You know, we can't run around in the large tractors, and we have to look at the appropriate technology. We're not talking about going back to the cave, back to real basics, but certainly appropriate technology. And we have to look at every drop of fossil fuels that we are using in the process of growing to make it absolutely watertight and sustainable for the future, because we're on 418 parts per million in the atmosphere, and it is growing, and it is very, very frightening that we're actually on the highest trajectory with regards to temperature increase. And we talk about 1.5 degrees, that's an average. We're actually heading towards 5 degrees at the moment on our trajectory, and that's just a different planet. So yeah, we've all got to get into a different gear, and we're trying.
Thank you, Jules. Yeah,
Dawn, could I just come in and just quickly summarise what I see's happened there, because I've been up there quite a lot. I try and volunteer once or twice a week up there, and we've got the beds set out, we've got sheet mulch down for a large area for vegetable growing. There's fruit trees there, we're mulching around, we're scything and bush clearing and everything. But what seems to have happened is that Climate and Community had a very, very clear to the word agreement, lease agreement with the guy that owned the land, and down to the letter, we're going to have a yurt of this size, we're going to have this structure, and they followed it to the letter. But what's happened is there's been a complaint by a neighbour that there's these people living on the land. So then that's gone through to the council, and the council are now putting pressure on the landowner that what you're doing is illegal and you'll get into trouble. So the landowner has completely changed tack now, and he's worried, and he's trying to get them off. But we've got to work out a system where if you have a genuine project and the landowner is happy for that project to be on the land with people living on
that you
the land,
that there are legal avenues.
Yes, that's where it has to change.
Thank you both for talking to us about your project. I mean, you know, Jules said we need these demonstrator projects that show what, you know, different approaches, different ways of living and working on the lands that can then be scaled up. And as you say, Val, there needs to be the mechanisms to enable this to happen, and for these kind of radical approaches to become more accepted and more mainstream, and that kind of emergency response that others have called for as well. So thank you both. Zoe, can you bring us back to the challenge? What do we need to do about land? What else is needed? What would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just wondering about how people thought were the easy wins when it comes to getting land. We are working with Transport for Wales, who are looking at land that they've got around the train stations, disused land that could be turned into community growing projects. That's never, we realise it doesn't happen overnight, and it's quite a long drawn out process, but you know, they're open to it and they're looking at it, and that's hopefully going to be a win further down the line. But people have mentioned sort of landowners. Are private landowners the easiest ones to try and approach and try and win over, or do we need to be pushing local authorities and health authorities, public sector more? I wondered how people thought and who would be the easiest ones for us to win over, really. And there's another, you know, developers as well. We work with Talbot, who, you know, do big housing structures and big housing developments, who also are trying to write into their development plans areas for community growing.
Okay, yeah. So what are some of the leads and perhaps easier wins? And someone mentioned the church in Wales as being a massive landowner as well. Do we need to do a better job of getting them to make more of their land available? Perspectives welcome. Louisa, I think you've had your hand up, your real hand. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak as a landowner. I felt, you know, I should comment. I hope there are a lot of positive landowners out there who are happy to work with people. And I, from my experience, I think there are. I think there are just so many barriers that it makes it very difficult. And speaking from, you know, personal experience, we've been advertising now for somebody to come and grow vegetables with us on the farm here in Gower since September. And we put it out there as either a joint venture or a rental or whatever, or employment, whatever people want. And we've had next to no response. So that kind of gives you a sense of, you know, there are other issues at play. And I don't know exactly what they are, but I suspect part of it is housing, which has already been mentioned, like nobody can afford to live out here. Cost of fuel if you're living in town. But also training. I think there are a lot of people out there who are very enthusiastic about growing and have done training, and I know Town have done a lot of training. But what we need, if we're going to really develop vegetable growing in bigger scale, is we need people who are more experienced, who can actually lead these projects. And those are the people that we're missing. We've got lots of people who are happy to come and help. We haven't got the people who've got the skills, and that's going to take years unless we can get some sort of fast track training in place, which I think is probably coming, and there is stuff happening, so that's positive. But there are so many issues here. But if anybody is interested in land, then please speak to me.
Thank you, Louisa. It's really valuable perspective, that, and it does link into this whole challenge around the lost skills and a generation of people who've never grown a vegetable in their lives. But yeah, useful to have the perspective of a landowner. There is some land available, but not the right people to take it forward. Thank you for sharing. Lucy, social farms and gardens, what would you like to add?
Yeah, so from a planning sort of perspective, the reason why unfortunately for people who want to live in the countryside, the reason why, you know, our land is green across the UK is because since 1947 we've directed development into towns and tried to keep the countryside open unless it's for the purposes of agriculture, forestry, or essential recreation and these sorts of things. So showing that you've got some sort of agricultural enterprise is you know, a way of trying to show that you need essential structures, but living on the land is always going to be very difficult. But yeah, if you want to have a chat with me about planning stuff around food growing and you know, the ability to sort of live on the land and planning policy sort of stuff, then do drop me a line. I've added it in the text, but I'd like to focus a little bit more on solutions and the, you know, the fact that the people that own our land across sort of the UK, you know, the Forestry Commission are the biggest landowner, and people like the Ministry of Defence and the Crown Estate, and Welsh Water actually, and people like the Church in Wales who've already been mentioned, National Trust. But there's some big landowners out there who are not as accessible, I suppose, as local authorities are, and we do tend to reach the local authorities to try and solve this problem of access to land, and they've got their own huge pressures around trying to get capital receipts for land. I do think they could probably have a little bit more of a strategic direction around perhaps county farms and things, but yeah, I think there are ways in which you can sort of try and access land, and I think it is at the heart of trying to integrate with a community, and then, you know, building that impetus around the community and building relationships in the community, and then, like has already been mentioned, presenting a good case for wanting to access a particular field, for instance, to the landowner. I would always say you must get planning advice, professional planning advice, or speak to the local authority before you enter into land access agreements, leases, land ownership, because they are very separate things. And often planning is the afterthought. But yeah, I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah, there are lots of sort of tips and ways and means around around accessing land, and I think we perhaps need to look at probably the wider perspective of landowners, not just local authorities, because they're under huge pressures. Unless there's particular political impetus to do those things, then it's going to be very hard even to have a conversation with estates departments in local authorities.
Thank you for that. I think there's some good advice there, and yeah, really important insight in social farms and gardens. So just a shout out that there's some expertise there for any groups that are looking for support in this. Julie, what would you like to say? What do you think about this challenge of access to land?
There are challenges, obviously, but one of the things that we found with the investigative work we did with the Field to Fork project on Gower was the readiness of schools to engage with projects such as ours. Now, some of them obviously come under local authority jurisdiction with regard to budgeting and such, and some of them don't. And you may find that the ones that don't come under the guidance of the local authority for their budget restrictions are more amenable to approach. But having been a long-term school governor as well, I'm aware that you know, we want our young people to be encouraged about growing things, and schools have parcels of land. And for our more urban counterparts who want to see more growing undertaken by young people, perhaps in more densely populated areas, it's always an idea to approach your local school. Of course, the converse of that is you may actually be helping them to put a case for keeping the land around their schools as well, because obviously they come under intense pressure to sell land which should be used for young people's health and recreation for development. So, you know, it's a win-win-win situation, but I would highly recommend anybody who has these sort of embryos of a project to approach your local school, find out what they're doing about growing. You know, this is a really hot topic, not just because it's fashionable, but because it's necessary to get young people growing and to get them eating healthily and to understand what actually is involved in the bones of food production. So I would highly recommend that people approach local landowners such as schools. They also have resources such as people power, little people power, albeit, but people power as well. So that would be a recommendation that I'd make.
Yeah, that's a great thought, isn't it? Connecting our twin ambitions of making more land available to communities and involving kids and schools in that journey. Thank you, Julie, for that. Suman, would you like to share your thoughts on this conversation? Welcome. Hi, you need to unmute yourself there.
Hello,
Hi.
good evening, everyone. Ma'am, I am a nutritional research scientist and works in India. And I have invented 100% organic herbicide. As we know that chemical herbicide are the main reason for several types of diseases that we get intoxicated through our foods. As we know that the glyphosate, 2,4-D are the main herbicide that are being used in our field, in our crops to control weeds. And the glyphosate has been mentioned as the most hazardous chemicals found ever in our agricultural field. So that after seeing all this research, we have invented 100% organic herbicide. It controls all types of weeds. It controls all types of unwanted grasses without harming our crops. Just as if we use our organic herbicide in crops, just like in wheat, maize, barley, or any types of vegetables, we can control all types of weeds without harming our crops, and we have the control over 4 to 6 months in a single spray. That's why and in under the Indian government, we have invented, and you can find our research on the government portal also, and we are going to explore it in throughout the world in March to April 2023. I want to just say, and sorry, I want to explore the features of our organic herbicide, that it is 100% natural. 100%
okay, I'm going to thank you, Suman. I'm going to interrupt you there. I can see you've shared useful links in the chat, and it's great to have you with us all the way from India. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. And if anyone is interested to pursue that, because we have been talking about, as Suman has said, the terrible impacts of glyphosate and dangerous chemicals that traditional industrial farming puts onto the land. So yeah, really important topic there. Yeah, I would like to draw partners' attention to a really inspiring project, and we had Duncan to speak at our last conference, so we didn't invite him to come along again today. But I do want to flag up this interesting project that some people will be aware of that's happening in the Brecon Beacons, so just down the road, called the 1200 project, or Our Food 1200, and it's an ambition to secure 1200 acres of land in Monmouthshire and the Brecon Beacons, specifically for small farming enterprises to start up and to support that regenerative local food system. And it's interesting to kind of look at their approach. They're putting out the call for landowners to come forward and make their land available. So there's a joined up approach to trying to secure land. They're putting out a call for land seekers, inviting people to come and create their horticultural enterprises in Monmouthshire and the Brecon Beacons, and they can help people with finding land. And you can see they've managed to secure, I don't know how they're getting on with their ambition for 1,200 acres, but you can see that they are advertising a number of opportunities around the area for growers to come and create enterprises. And it's an inspiring project because of the sort of scale of the ambition. And I know Duncan quite well from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and he's you know, a real sort of big vision, big thinker, very ambitious. And so it'll be interesting to keep an eye on what happens with this. And maybe colleagues in the room can point to other similar initiatives. But this seems to be a really joined up approach across this particular part of Wales, and offering the kind of support that is needed to create this vision. And it's interesting to look at their actions. So they've created an alliance of small farms who are working together to collaborate on their marketing and sales, which was something we talked about yesterday, collaboration. They're building place-based websites promoting local food, local growers. They're lobbying on behalf of farmers to large planning committees and landowners. They're coordinating work placements with growers, so trying to address the skills gaps, and yeah, working on those planning barriers. They've become a kind of consultee for a number of kind of policy making organisations like the National Park around planning. Yeah, just really inspiring actually, isn't it, to look at the different ways that this partnership is seeking to make a difference. They talk about county farms, and developing multi-enterprise farm hubs, publicity, so you know, that joined up approach to seeking land and seeking growers, just amplifying that whole story across the county, and you know, a joined up approach to lobbying for the changes that are needed and working closely with local authorities. It says they're a member of a stakeholder group looking at the new National Park management plans. So great to have an organisation like this around the table and getting out and about. And as I say, we've had them to speak at this event in the past, and I'm sure we'll bring them back in. But do partners know of similar initiatives across our region? There's another project we've been following called the Pontypridd Land Society, which is a group of local people in Pontypridd seeking to crowdfund in order to purchase community lands, and they've set up an organisation that could take on ownership and lease of lands for community and small scale growing around Pontypridd. But yes, if you know of inspiring projects that are seeking to tackle this, or any advice on that, we'd love to hear from you. And Vicky, I wonder if you would like to talk a little bit about what's happening in Pembrokeshire and your work to try and secure land for growing, and where you've been successful.
I think Vicky had to leave.
She's dropped off, is she? Okay, well, I'm looking for other hands then. Leads on any projects or initiatives that show what's possible across our region.
I can say a bit about what Vicky's trying to achieve if you want. Yeah, there's a local authority allotments grant, and Pembrokeshire Council didn't want to take it up, and then she approached them about perhaps using the grant from Welsh Government to get some land started up on the edge of a housing estate. And then they sort of turned around and said that they were going to now use the local authority allotment grant for something else. So she's now fundraising locally, crowdfunding to try and buy the land, and she's trying to tap into various funding pots as well to see if you know, they can take this site forward for you know, because it's so close to housing and an area that really needs local food growing. And I think she's sort of at the start of a journey on that. But they've got another site as well, that they are taking forward, and that have had some success with a landowner. Yeah, Group Resilience are a really great organisation, and they're trying to do some really inspiring you know, sort of things that, and being proactive and organised. So yeah, I think that's a very small summary of some of the things that they're doing, and we're trying to support them with. Yeah.
Thank you for coming in there. Great. Well, it says your name is Caroline Laxton. Yes, I'd like to hear from you. Are you able to unmute? You might need to press that button, sorry, to unmute your microphone there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great. Hi.
Okay, I'm Caroline Laxton's other half. I'm Tony, and she's had to slip out just for a minute. I'm sure that most people in this, well, all people in this group are already converted to many aspects of this food problem, including the food that you eat yourselves. And I'm guessing that most people that I'm talking to now eat a basically vegetable-based diet, whether you eat meat or not with it, and dairy or not with it. Some will, some won't. You eat essentially a vegetable-based diet. Most people don't. And that applies to young people as well as older people. I know there's some trend towards vegetarian diet and vegan diet at the moment, but the terribly unhealthy thing, as unhealthy if not more than smoking and drinking and all the rest of it, is a highly processed food diet. And this comes back to a point made by several people. I've got Mike's name mentioned, but several people, Lucy I think has mentioned it, and Louise earlier, education. Somehow, and that means coming into schools, I think, we have to encourage young people to actually want to eat vegetables, because all the projects we've been talking about in using land have been small farms on the whole, except for that 1,200 acre project, which is multiple small projects. They've all been small. Nobody's going to be planting 100 acre fields with wheat. That's not Welsh farming on the whole. So we need the whole thing to change, don't we? From what people actually want to eat, chuck out the sugary drinks and all that fast food and start eating a healthy diet. And it all has to be tied together. And so we have to tackle every aspect of this huge problem. And I know I haven't got anything personal to offer except for things that Carrie's done, but those are my thoughts. We need to change what people want to eat. And then they might start eating more local produce, because they're not buying it because they're eating junk, or many of them are. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us what this is all about. And I think the conversation last night, for those that weren't able to join us, we talked specifically about that thing about marketing. How do we grow the demand for more local veg and locally grown food? And then we talked about projects engaging with schools, and it's inspiring to hear about a lot of nice initiatives engaging young people in thinking about where their food comes from. And there's this proposal that, well, a proposal emerging from this group and others, that every school should adopt a farm, which would be an inspiring way forward. Yeah, great to see how different examples are demonstrating what's possible, but frustrating the slow pace of scale, the slow pace of making these solutions large enough, commensurate with the size of the challenges, and yeah, changing what people want to eat. So perhaps that leads us on nicely to a conversation about connecting local food and producers and growers in the local area with hospitality businesses and the tourism trade. We would love to see South West Wales really amplifying local produce as one of its key selling points to visitors to our region. And we would love to see cafes, restaurants, hotels and food businesses across our region under some, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but under more encouragement to use local ingredients and to shout about the local produce that they are proud to serve. And I think one of the things we can all do is to remember to ask whenever we're in cafes and restaurants across our region, remember to ask what's local, what have you got on the menu that's local, and more of us asking for that change is needed. Zoe, what would you like to say about the importance of connecting local food with hospitality?
Just about what you said about asking, and we've done it a lot when we're organising in-person events, and we've run large conferences ever since we began for the region. And what we've done is, when we hire those large venues, put the pressure on the venue to make sure that they are using locally sourced foods. Well, most recently we ran the Green Recovery Conference in the Branwyn Hall, and the compliments that the Branwyn had for the quality of the food was like, they said they'd never had compliments like it, because we'd put the pressure on them to actually, and we know when I first said it to them, they're like, oh yeah, we use Castle Howell. Like, no. I mean, not just get Castle Howell to deliver foods from different places. We want you to actually get out, do a bit of work, and look at who you can purchase food from. And it worked really well. And I think when it comes to us asking, yes, when we go into restaurants or even into supermarkets, but when we go into restaurants, is the food local? But again, in anything that we do, we need to be asking those questions.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Who's got some great examples of good connections between cafes and restaurants and local food? And talk to us a little bit about the opportunities that exist there. Oh, Jane, would you like to come in on any of that, or I'll just mute you? I'll start calling on people who I know are in the audience that I would like to hear from, and one of those is Jack. Jack, I saw you earlier, and we'd love to hear your perspective on the opportunities for local producers to get their products into food businesses, and anyone else that would like to comment on the tourism angle and the hospitality angle of how we amplify local food and strengthen the system. Richard is a real expert in some of this. Richard, tell us a bit about your work in the past and what you're doing now to promote local food in hospitality.
Hi everybody, thank you. I don't know about great expert, but thanks for the big up, Dawn, to start with. Yeah, I work on the trade development team, which is part of Food and Drink Wales, and the work they do. And we're working with hospitality businesses to try and get them to, in general, supply more Welsh food and drink through what they do, and then with that to really focus on the provenance and the sourcing and improving that. And I think it is, as we've touched on, already today, there's a lot of that that's about education. I think people's awareness of food, where it comes from, and the food system in general, it is something that just needs to underpin everything. But I think there are more and more examples coming forward where hospitality businesses are starting to recognise the value of local sourcing, the value of provenance, the value of Welsh food and drink within Wales, and starting to do more with it. We've recently done a webinar at national UK level, talking about customer research, customer insights, customer preferences and personas around what people will spend when things are shown with provenance. And whilst that doesn't work in every venue and every segment of society, it really is just spreading that message out to hospitality businesses for them to understand, the opportunities that are open to them. Something we're doing this week is we're working with Castle Howell, which have got their own strengths and their own weaknesses, like any business and any one of us here, but to educate their sales team around some of the research around provenance and Welshness and how to build that through in their offer. But we're also working with them to look at extending their product range to have more local products. So one of my colleagues, Lowry's on the call today, I believe, and we've set up a Pembrokeshire special interest group around GI products. So trying to work out what the opportunities are and what the barriers are to getting more GI recognised products from in Wales, such as Welsh whisky or oysters or lava bread or even Devonshire plums, which falls outside the region, but is clearly part of the bigger picture, to be more widely available, more called out on menus, because I strongly believe that the more that you walk into a venue and the menu tells you where something's from, the more customers will start to demand that, going back to the point that Zoe made earlier. I think the more that it's standard that people can see where their food's from, where it's sourced, what provenance or accreditation or anything it's got, the more people will notice when it's missing. And I'll stop now because I'm sure other people will have perspectives.
Yeah, great to hear that there's some research that backs up that hunch that we have, that selling more, promoting more local foods is a marketing benefit, and that consumers really do want that, and certainly something that I look for and ask about when I go into hospitality businesses, and all too often I am disappointed by the lack of something local on the menu. So yeah, great work there. Thank you, Richard. Jack, will you come in on this topic? Jack, either with your Swansea Council hat on or your Farmco hat on.
Well, I'll start with my Swansea Council hat on, if that's okay. I was going to put my hand up. I've got a bit of a cough, so excuse me. But yeah, we've recently done a feasibility study on shortening food supply chains in Swansea, and it's really tricky, because I think these restaurants, they want to have, anyone we speak to that has a restaurant or cafe wants to support local, I think, but the reality and logistics still aren't there, and the pricing. Because like you said, if you're a busy chef, if you're a busy restaurant owner, pick up the phone and to call Castle Howell or to write a quick email and go, I need this, and it can come to you by that day, on that day, if you call them in the morning. Is the convenience, the timings, etc. are, and they're obviously, as a company, got that down very well. And if you are, you want to go and get from, I don't know, 15 separate producers around Swansea and Gower, and you've got to check their availability, you've got to text them, email them separately. Some people might be on the farm and they're not answering their phones. It becomes quite a tricky thing to do. And then I suppose with my Farmco hat on, I could probably give you an example of we actually do ordering, not for, but it would be a similar process. We do it for a farm shop, farm to fork, and getting that process done it's sometimes can be 4 or 5 hours work, going back and forth. We haven't got this, having to go to someone else to fulfill that order, because so yeah, I think having from our feasibility study, I think if you're talking about small scale farms, you almost want those people to be working together in some sort of format, so you can have more product and more offering in one place and try and keep the cost down. But ultimately, it does come down to cost. And we speak to a lot of restaurant owners, and we're sort of saying, look, and what tends to happen is the guys that are doing it well or half well, or what they're doing is picking and choosing. They're getting Welsh cheese. They might get, if they're have an alcohol license, they might get Tiny Rebel beer in from Cardiff. But what they're not doing, but they're still going to I can't remember the names, but the big wholesalers for the fruit and veg, where just they go to Bristol, Total Produce Direct, that's the one. So it's it's easy. They can have stuff on account. They can let that account build up. They don't have to pay it every week, etc., etc. So it's yeah, it's still, you still have tricky times, and then it comes down to cost as well, because like if we are buying you know, sort of veg from the Gower and stuff like that, it's double, maybe sometimes triple the price of what you can get for Total Produce Direct or some of the other ones, and especially at the moment. And I think it's a shame because sort of just after COVID and that sort of voice of local being quite loud has kind of dropped off a bit, because we've got this cost of living crisis, and of course restaurants now have got ridiculous energy bills, potentially got a drop in trade because people are saving money and not going out, and then to sort of say to them, hey, why don't you get this product that's 3 times more than you already pay, they're a bit like, we can't do it, and we can't. I speak to a restaurant owner, I won't name the name, but it's in Carmarthenshire and is very sort of well known, and the owner tells me they seem to do everything in most part farm to fork, and have a really good sort of range of sort of organic products and whatnot. And he tells me when you do it like that, even with a very, very busy restaurant that is in most part fully booked all the time, you can't make money, you break even, because the cost of the produce is too much and you can't put that onto the customer. So I think it's about doing it in parts, so to speak, where you've got, you know, we're speaking to a few restaurants and saying, you know, oh, we can't do grass-fed beef burgers from the Gower because they're too expensive. And it's like, why can't you have a section on the menu? You've got your normal beef burger, then you've got the Gower grass-fed beef burger, and the normal burger costs £6 and the Gower grass-fed burger costs £12, and have that option there. So we're looking at working with these people to sort of, you know, not go all the way and go, you have to be completely local or that's it, but to sort of start pushing these products into these places. And I think people want that point of difference as well. You know, I certainly do, but maybe I'm a bit different. But when I go somewhere, I don't want to have, you know, beef that I don't know where it comes from, or lamb where, you know, it might be imported, etc. I want to know the farmer's name, where it comes from, and how it's farmed. Is it, you know, is it given this, that, and the other? Is it given injections? Is it on sort of cheap feed, etc.? So I think it's going that way, but it's really slow. And in my council role, I'm there trying to connect the dots. It's not easy, but we have projects on the going that are hopefully going to facilitate that. So yeah,
great work. Thanks, Jack, and thanks for sort of laying out kind of some of the objections and the barriers that we need to overcome, and the ways in which we can better support hospitality businesses in this, because we know it's not an easy time for hospitality businesses either, and they've got loads of challenges. So yeah, greater collaboration and kind of joined up approaches, smaller producers working together to sort of provide the volumes, and how can we make that easier and more convenient. And yeah, really interesting idea that about, you know, restaurants not going all the way, but offering some options and making it clear which parts of their menu are locally sourced, and that might then give them useful data that would enable them to invest more in local if they could see that it was making a difference. But I think also restaurants and cafes, they have a real opportunity on this education piece, on the raising awareness piece, because people going into local restaurants and cafes, if they can read about it on the menu, even if they don't feel like they can stretch to a £12 burger, at least they're reading about the difference. And if they can start to have an awareness that there is the difference between cheap beef and locally grown, regeneratively grown beef, there's an important message that can come through from these businesses in that education. Yeah, great. Really thought-provoking, everything that Jack shared there. Abby from Planet, I'd like to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the tourist angle with our community food hubs, and then more recently with the fresh food vending machines that's coming in. We're looking at trying to target tourists perhaps second homers travelling down to use the click and collect option of the vending machines. We're working with local producers who could perhaps group in together and use the larger boxes of the vending machines, so that the people sort of travelling down buy local, they've kind of not got an excuse to do a kind of supermarket click and collect. The produce is ready there and then for them. So we're just already getting lots of interest on that. I thought I'd just mention it.
Yeah, that's a really great one, and perhaps something that could be rolled out across the region, working with second holiday home owners, and amplifying the availability of local food for people visiting. Because when you're arriving in a place for the first time and you don't know where to go for good food, how can we make that easier and more visible for visitors? That's a great initiative there, Abby. Thank you for that. Eilish, yes, what would you like to say?
Hi, so my background is I'm a registered nutritionist, and I wanted to kind of look at how can you actually showcase something that is more sustainable nutrition in terms of a pop-up. So I set a pop-up up in Newport last summer, but I went from the premise of actually what was actually local to me, food-wise. So but local being local from sustainable regenerative farming. So I identified where I could get my burgers from, where I could get all my veg from, which was chemical free or organic. And looking price wise, so obviously Castle Howell comes up, Booker's, you know, I was looking for a really healthy alternative burger bun. So I approached a bakery, a Nuna bakery, and they're about 25 mile away up in Llandyssil, but they give me a handmade organic sourdough bun, which was not far off comparative to some of the stuff that Castle Howell would have been offering me as well. So that was quite a shock, that actually if you go out there and you actually speak to local businesses as well, as kind of, can you do this for me? I'm only working on small scale. I was only actually operating over the summer. But also looking at, so I introduced sort of forage foods as well. I made vegetarian, vegan, handmade burgers from local veg, and also sourcing pulses from Hodmedod's as well. So trying to build a picture for the customer in terms of like where all that food was actually coming from. And it did create like a more high-end burger, but it was also something that, being like street food as well, it really appealed to all the different sort of generations. So, you know, kids coming in with their parents, they were happy to try the burger as well, with the salad, with the handmade relishes. We made relishes with local blueberries from Lammas, and we picked bilberries, and we introduced obviously the Welsh cheeses. So we really made like a beautiful burger. We had local kimchi from an OPD just up the road as well. And again, it was that thing, look at what was around and then build something around that. So that was a really nice little start, little introduction to kind of what can you do. And then over Christmas, New Year, so I thought I would try something different, but looking also like within catering, we have not just the food, we've got the energy costs as well. So looking at slow cooking as the basis for producing meals. So we had slow cooked curries, we had slow cooked taco night. And again, it was kind of like the different kind of flavors and things that people were thinking, right, you know, so where does this come from? And we had like avocado free guacamole made from fava beans, and, you know, just different things that people were like, God, I didn't think you could actually do that. But trying to highlight then again, if you actually brought it down to what is available, it's not just Welsh, because we have to think where are the grains and the pulses coming from as well, British grown, and what can we do with those? So having things like buckwheat and spelt and basically no rice, that's the big challenge, is kind of, so what would the menu look like if, you know, restaurants were to actually say, what is available in this area? What can we do? So that's the starting point that we have to come from. And then I think that's within the catering industry as well, that chefs, you know, I don't know, I'm not a chef, I'm not trained. It's basically, it's just looking at what your resources are and what can you do. And obviously to produce, you can't do that 100% because there's various things and various spices and flavorings that you want to have as well. But to make the meats and the veg and the grains matter in terms of what's on the plates is really, really important. But I worked with Vicky because we talked, she's obviously gone now, she's not here, but she started the Newport Food Festival that was last October. So I was involved in that. And so when we actually created a database for all the local producers who are from sustainable backgrounds, and then we gave that information to the eateries in Newport and asked them to come up with their own menu based on that. And that was a lovely exercise in kind of getting them to think of what can they produce, and then obviously advertising it, putting it out there. It became an educational thing for the customer. And yeah, if it was producing cowl or it was producing like a 3-course meal, but getting that out there, getting that information, which is like, you know, as a customer, you shouldn't have to go and ask where's this from. That information should be there because that should be selling the product as well. So that's what's important. So hopefully we're looking at having a similar festival in Fishguard now, September, October, and try and replicate that model as well, and give eateries a chance, as we are at the moment, coming together with the Chamber of Trade and Commerce to actually look at how we all benefit from coming together with these ideas within catering. But I think the energy side of it is a big issue. So that's another side, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eilish, for sharing both those stories. And really amazing, lovely, inspiring to hear about your food pop-ups. And I love that perspective of starting with local ingredients and then thinking, okay, what can I make? And that real focus on what is available locally and what you can turn that into. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And the Newport Food Festival, and we're talking about Newport in West Wales, obviously, for those who are following along, is a great demonstrator of what you can do if you bring together local eateries and yeah, try and link them up with locally produced food. So looking forward to seeing that idea replicated across the region. And I'm sure the Group Resilience team would be really keen to share the learnings from what they're doing. And that's like really place-based, isn't it? Like how many of us could in our local villages or small communities try and convene a conversation with the cafes and restaurants and then perhaps some local food producers as well, and try and put this up people's agenda and also try and overcome some of the obstacles and barriers which we've heard something about. Louisa, sorry, I've seen you waving your hand. Please do come in.
Oh, sorry, I feel like I'm doing too much talking, but no, I was just going to say that we've dealt with about 20 restaurants in the last couple of years with selling veg, and one thing I've noticed is that coming back to costs, a lot of chefs are really enthusiastic, but they've obviously got the money issue to deal with, so they are really keen on having maybe 2 or 3 items on their menu where they can flag up, we've got Pavelum Farm this or Pavelum Farm that, because it just gives them a local flavour without needing to be buying everything local, which isn't economically viable. And the other quick comment was about a local delivery van. I know it's being done in other parts of the UK where you have somebody goes around and picks up all the local produce and delivers it. That would be great because a lot of us farmers are out on the land and we haven't got time to do deliveries, and that would be a huge sort of positive thing. And I think I just caught the end of what you were saying about local work with restaurants. I know Jack set up a great event recently in Brangwen Hall where we were talking to restaurateurs, which was great. So that sort of work is happening and is brilliant. And I keep coming back to the fact we need more growers to actually produce the produce so that these restaurants have got something to put on their plates.
And you've spoken before, Louisa, about the importance of the kind of the long-term nature of those relationships. So the growers need to be talking to the hospitality businesses like really early in the season and getting some idea of what they should be growing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. Jane, Climate Change Manager, Swansea Council, how would you like to contribute?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, just on a few things. Basically coming back to a few things that have actually been said already. and linking in with some of my previous employment. So a lot of people were talking about education and the need for getting people to be able to grow their own food, whether it be on their allotment or whether it be in school and things like that. When I was head of learning at the National Botanic Garden of Wales, I started something called Growing the Future, and that is still going in some sort of guise. And I've just looked at their website, and they're desperate for people that are happy to become trainers for them. So the idea is to work in your local community, to be paid to train people that sign up to want to learn to grow and things like that. So I'm urging anybody that's actually on this call that is a good grower to actually maybe contact Growing the Future so that you can actually help with that initiative. The idea being that we get a whole growing network across the whole of Wales. The other thing is in my last employment, I was the manager of a 142-bedded environmental education centre at the back of Margam Park, run by the Field Studies Council. And we had about 16 to 18,000 pupils coming through us every year. And you can imagine that was 3 meals a day. So there was an awful lot of catering to do. And I totally agree with the whole idea of the fact that, you know, cost does come into it. But I really tried to push the whole local food and low carbon food thing. And one of the things that we found was really interesting was the communication. And we ended up developing a whole set of menus for the rest of the FSC. And there is 17 or 18 centres across the UK where we could actually demonstrate low carbon food. And what we did was we labelled it and we rated it in terms of whether it was on a traffic light system as to what was local, what was low carbon and things like that. And it was actually amazing to see that there were a lot of pupils there that had probably, you know, they'd come to do their geography A-level or whatever and hadn't necessarily thought about it in wider terms. And by the end of the week, with some really subtle, very good communication, people were really wanting to engage. And I think going back to the whole idea of restaurants and having an alternative, I think is a really good thing so that people can actually do that. We hosted the Young Vegans a couple of years on the trot in the summer, summer holidays. And again, that sort of helped us to push a lot of other types of menus and develop other types of menus as well. So I just wanted to share those. And I think that, you know, there's lots of things that you can do. I think communication is a real key. I think getting people out and growing in their local communities is a real key. And it's something that Rachel and I are working on, looking at some sort of food stuff for the future at the moment in Swansea Council.
Thank
Obviously,
you.
well.
Yeah, thank you for flagging up some of those useful resources and great work that is happening in all of this. I think all these small initiatives have a combined effect, and we'll see hopefully more and more local produce available more easily. But it would be great to start to sum up now and come together around what you think are the key next actions. What would you, if you had to pick from everything you've heard today, what you would like us to do, and I'm going to use the word us, but I don't mean me and Zoe run off and have to do it all ourselves. I mean all of us together. What is needed? What would be some of the really useful interventions? The kinds of things that I'm thinking about is, you know, is there one place to go and look to find out what local produce is available? Is there, where do people go and find out what's available across our region? Are these conversations happening enough, bringing together enough small food producers, farmers and growers? Does there need to be greater effort to bring everybody around the table and have these conversations at a greater scale? Some fantastic work going on in Pembrokeshire. I'm reading in the chat about labelling stuff as Pembrokeshire produce. Is that something that could be rolled out? How could we get the message across to more of our visitors this summer? I love the thing about connecting self-catering accommodation with local food boxes. What about joining up the distribution? Can we expand things like FarmCo and other initiatives to enable more local producers to sell through those avenues? I'd love to just collect our thoughts for a few moments. Perhaps you could write down 3 actions that you think would be that you'd like to see progress on, or that you'd like to be involved in. One of the ways we work here for the region is setting up working groups to take ideas forward. So what would you like to be involved in to make change in this space? Take a couple of moments just to collect your own thoughts. What are the actions emerging from the discussion? Those of you who were here yesterday as well, you can search your memory for the key emerging actions from yesterday, but just a brief 10-minute discussion now about actions will give us a really clear path forward to make some change happen over the next few months together as we seek to amplify this mission across our region. So if you are just taking a few moments to collect your thoughts on what you'd like to see happen next and what actions we should take away from today's discussion, that would be great. And then you can start feeding some of those ideas into the chat, and anyone who would like to share what they've written down, please put your hand up and briefly summarize your actions. I'd like to hear from about 5 people. So be one of those, put your hands up and tell me what you think are the actions emerging from today's meeting. Thank you for being the first. Rich from Planet, what are the actions?
Hi, just one of the things that I think has been leaping out to me from as a conclusion of what the contributors have said today is that innovation is key to moving forward. Jack mentioned a great idea, I think a brilliant idea earlier on, of putting the Gower burger on the menu at the same time and giving people the option at the retail point, at the purchase point. And I think it's small actions times a lot of people, and small innovative actions times a lot of people will bring about the big change. And I think constantly looking at innovative new ways of doing things. You know, our project with the Pembrokeshire Fresh vending machine is a new way of doing things and a new way of bringing a distribution method to the market. Things like that are key. I think that sadly, the markets are the markets, and they will always pose a challenge to small independent producers. But we have to look for the smart, innovative ways in which we can change the status quo to make it better for everyone. That's just my conclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. And I think we've heard so many great little insights today that perhaps spark different ideas for all of us in our work, you know, and really learn from each other about great things that are happening already across the region. And I wonder the extent to which the 4 local authorities are joining up and sharing knowledge, but I think that's something that really needs to happen as well, because there are these kind of shining examples and good work going on. We need to make sure we're not working in silos. Who else would like to share anything that they've written down? What would you like to see happen next? What are the actions? Or what are you personally taking away from today's discussion? What stood out for you? I've said I'd like 5 people, so I feel a bit like a teacher now. Until you answer the question, you're not allowed to leave. Val, thank you for putting your hands up. What are the actions?
Pretty much what I said before, really. I think we've just got to start street discussions and start to rebuild the communities and start understanding the power that we've got just by talking first and like seeing what resources we've already got, what skills we've already got, and then joining those. So Swansea Climate Action Network are starting to move towards some local meetings. The first area that we've been looking at is Sandfields, because one of our members is actually like living in there, and she says at the moment they don't know what they're going to do if flooding occurs. I think there's been some roads have actually been told by the council to expect to be prepared for evacuation this winter with flash floods. But the residents don't actually know what's going to happen. So we're putting a leaflet together. We've got a meeting at the Environment Centre on the 25th, face-to-face meeting. I'll put our website address in the chat. So basically, because we've got two prongs really to what we do. One is the campaigning side and bringing like climate campaigners and also community groups together under a kind of umbrella in Swansea, so we can have more solidarity with each other. But the other side is the building community resilience and the fact that actually quite a lot of this climate change is already locked into the system. So what are we going to do if we get food shortages in the shops, or we get a drought, or we get a flood? But also there'll be a lot of joy in that because people are crying out for community. So we'll be sort of looking at what we can do, but also along the way we'll be providing much more joy for each other in our lives. And I think Liz Truss that said about like, we're talking about abundance, and that us lot weren't the coalition, we were the coalition against abundance or something, and like we have got abundance, but it's not the normal economic abundance. It's the abundance of willpower and passion and joy and community, and all that stuff.
Inspiring words. Yeah, absolutely. Let's bring some of that passion into those kind of local conversations and start those conversations with our neighbours to build that resilience hyperlocal.
Yes, but then also alongside that, building very, very solid connections with our local representatives, and actually attempting to work side by side if they will be open enough to allow that.
Great, lovely. Thank you, Val. Powerful call to action there. Julie, what actions have arisen from today's discussion for you?
Me, I think one of the most important actions that I can see, no disrespect to everybody that is growing on small scale with hospitality, but I think one of the big gaps that we've got is for growing and produce supplying to scale. Now, we did used to do that locally. In fact, Gower as a peninsula was resilient and self-sustaining with over 90 farms going back to the beginning of the century. And it had to be because of such poor transport links. And we've been really reduced to 2 or 3, so clearly there is the capacity, there is the ingenuity, and there is the will. What there isn't, or there hasn't been, is a reliable and fair market for that produce. And so, to produce to scale, and having spoken to so many farmers and producers through the Field to Fork project, I really think we need to look at, do we want farming as an industry locally? And if we do, what are we prepared to do to not just hear their challenges, but to help them with those challenges and to meet the very real crises that they find themselves in now. The farming community is sadly on its knees, and so challenges to them are injurious rather than helpful, and asking them to continually lower their prices or comparing the cost of their food with other alternatives which perhaps don't have the same carbon footprint, don't offer the same employment opportunities, and don't have the same quality or environmental standards, perhaps, is not a fair comparison. And so I never enter into anything unless I enter into it passionately. And I do genuinely believe that the trend towards a barren landscape where you cannot get a Gower potato can be reversed.
Thank you for your passion there. So solidarity with our local farmers, listening to them and being serious about how we support them and buy their produce, and how can we do that at scale. Thank you, Julie. Zoe.
Three things really that I would like to see action going forward. I'd like to expand on the Gower Fields to Fork project and see how we can scale that up and do that across the 4 counties. It'd be great if local authorities in Pembroke, Carmarthen and Neath for Talbot tried it out as well, and I'd love to see that expand. I would love to work with others in the room on that buy local campaign. As Jack's mentioned, they've done a feasibility study, and Mike has mentioned they're working hard on City of Independence and promoting. It would be great if we can collaborate and really expand on that sort of thing. I think that's it. I can't remember what the third thing was, but
okay,
might come to me.
I'm sure it will come back to you. Oh, thanks all. I don't see any more waving hands. When I think about next actions, it often comes back to conversations like this and more of them, and with an expanded list of participants. So I'm really grateful to you all for coming along, sharing your perspectives and listening to each other. I think that's so important, hearing different voices from across the system, and that helps us to speak more knowledgeably about these issues and helps us to take responsibility for our own part that we have to play, and our opportunity to influence others that we talk to. And I think there's a huge opportunity around all of this. I think it's come through really clearly this morning that we've got to really grapple with the perilous climate situation and the impacts that that is going to have in not too far distant future, that is going to make this conversation even more urgent, even more important, and much more relevant to more and more people. So how are we readying ourselves as the South West Wales regional food system, readying ourselves for the time to come? But then on a more positive note, the opportunities for businesses to grow, for more people to get involved in their local economy with food enterprises of one sort or another. They need all of us as a strong network of buyers and consumers and customers, really standing in solidarity with those small businesses across our region, and helping to make sure we're connecting the dots. So lots more discussions like this, lots more insight from all of you. Please do keep myself and Zoe and the team up to date with food initiatives as you see them. We're doing our best to log and map and keep in touch with great examples, but we can't do that if we don't know about them. So please share updates with us. Here in Swansea, Boyd Abertawe is pleased to have received some funding through Welsh Government, specifically looking at food poverty, but we're a growing network of organisations in Swansea, and I know similar initiatives are taking place in other counties. Please, I think lots of links have been shared and we will circulate those, but make sure you're connected to a food partnership or a food network where you are, and encourage others to do the same. And please stay connected with us. Food is one of our key impact areas for the year ahead, and we'll be looking forward to keeping the connections going. We'll be sharing the links, the recordings, the actions, and the calls to action from this afternoon's discussion and yesterday's meeting. But I think I'm going to wrap up now and give you all a chance to go and get some lunch. So thank you for being part of the meeting. You're allowed now to unmute yourselves and say goodbye, and I will end the meeting on a high note, which is thank you so much for the inspiration and the passion that has been shared. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
So,
bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Great to see you. Bye-bye.